At the end of this lecture, you should know what annotations are and what role they play within user expressions and how are they set up using Dialogflow. We've already created the entities that we need. We are now set up with all the building blocks to configure our chatbot. So we've defined the book rooms and the book cars intent, and we've defined cars and rooms as the entities which the user will use to specify the kind of car and the kind of room that he wants. We are now ready to configure the four different sections that exist within an intent. We'll start off with the user says section. So let's go to the intents that we'd set up earlier. We'd created two custom intents, the book cars and the book rooms. Click on the book cars intent. That's what we'll configure first. This is the intent page. We'd only set up the name earlier. There are many other sections that we need to configure before we get our intent to work as we expect it to. We'll start off with the user says section. If you remember from the big picture that we spoke about, the user says are user expressions that a particular user might use. These are phrases or text fragments in the primary language of the chatbot, which a user might use to accomplish a particular objective. Now, there are different ways in which this particular intent can be invoked, and all the phrases that will invoke this intent should be configured in the user says section. The phrases that you'll use in the user says section should be written in natural conversational style, and they should be annotated so that parameter values that a user specifies, such as the room type that he's interested in, the date for which he wants the booking, can be extracted from user phrases. We'll start off with a simple example here. While booking a car, your chatbot might encounter a simple query which says, I need a car tomorrow. So it's pretty clear that the user wants a car because that's specified here. And it's also clear what date he wants this car for. And your book car's intent within Dialogflow is smart enough to identify this, and it annotates tomorrow. You can see that the yellow color is used to identify the fact that a slot has been filled. A parameter value has been specified, and this parameter value should have an entity associated with it. And in this case, the entity associated with it is a system defined entity of type date. Annotations are added to user expressions automatically. It's possible, though, that Dialogflow does not identify a particular parameter value within a user expression. In that case, you can add this annotation manually by selecting that word, right clicking, and adding the annotation. But really, what makes Dialogflow so easy to use and to configure is the fact that when you add example user expressions to your user says sections, they are annotated automatically. The system detects that the words that the user speaks correspond to some entities, which can be either system entities or built in entities or developer entities which you have defined upfront. Another thing to note is that a table is created below each expression specifying the parameter name, the entity corresponding to that parameter, and the value associated with that parameter in this particular expression. We'll take a closer look at the at sys.date entity. This is a system entity, which is why it has the prefix sys. These are pre-built entities provided by Dialogflow to handle the most popular concepts such as date, location, and so on. All the parameters or slots which are specified within the user expressions that you define on this page will be added to a parameter table at the bottom below action if you scroll down on your Dialogflow screen. Here we've had just one parameter so far, so only date of type sysdate is added to this table. Let's add in some more user expressions. Can you book me a car? Here, there are no parameters or no slots that are specified by the user. This just maps to the book car's intent. There is no additional information that the user has provided if he uses this expression, so this is not annotated. If the user uses an expression like, can you get me a sedan for tomorrow? There are two parameters here which have associated values, the sedan and the tomorrow. The sedan has been correctly annotated to be of type cars. This is a developer defined entity. Just adding this user expression makes it clear to Dialogflow that other expressions such as get me a convertible for Friday, get me a SUV for the day after tomorrow, all of these are valid expressions. The entity type is at cars, so it can be replaced by any other entity value, and Dialogflow will understand that. The other parameter value contained in this expression is the date for which we want the car booking. That has also been annotated appropriately by Dialogflow. And this additional parameter that we didn't know of before, that is the car type parameter, has been added to the parameter table at the bottom with the corresponding entity type and the corresponding variable to hold this. It's good practice to add in as many user expressions as you can think of, because the more phrases or text fragments that your agent understands, the more intelligent or smart your bot will appear. So, book me a convertible for tomorrow, book me a sedan, get me an SUV, book a car. All of these are valid phrases that will invoke the book car's intent. Observe that Dialogflow is picking up the right annotations for all of these. Can you reserve a car for me? Will you book a sedan for me? And so on. Add in as many as you can think of. Think carefully about how a customer will interact with your bot. I want you to observe one thing about this at sys.date annotation. We're always talking about tomorrow, this Friday, the day after tomorrow, next Tuesday, and so on. This sys.date entity, which is a built-in entity, is powerful enough to understand relative dates. You can also give it specific dates like November 15th, 2017, January 18th, 2018, and so on. But relative dates are what your customer might use, and this is powerful enough to figure this out. We are done with configuring the user says section. Let's go on to the next section here, and that is events. We are not going to define any events here, but you should know what it is and how you can use it. Now, you can often trigger a specific intent using a specific event name that you configure here rather than a natural language query. So instead of saying book a car, let's say your event name was book cars. So you can simply pass in book cars in an integrated application and it will automatically invoke the book cars intent. We won't be using events in our example here because we want to trigger this intent not using a specific event name, but by natural language queries, which we've configured in the user says section. Now, the typical use case once an intent is triggered is for the intent to extract all the information it requires from the user and pass it along to some server code which serves to fulfill this intent. Once the execution goes from the intent to the server code running on the backend to fulfill the intent, what exactly the action is that the server code has to perform is specified by this action string that you can configure here on this page. We are not actually configuring an action string here, but let's say the string that we specified here was book car. Then on the server code, let's say you were writing code in Java, you would have an if statement like this. If action is equal to book car, then perform the series of steps for this car booking, update the database, and so on. We are not going to connect to the backend for this particular intent. We'll see an example of that later on in this course, which is why we do not specify an action string here. We can simply ignore it for now. And finally, after all our user expressions have been configured, at the bottom is the parameters table, which specifies all the entities which we have to have values for when we want to book a car. Notice that we need another piece of information to book a car, and that is the city where we want the car booking. I'm not going to show you how exactly to do it here. I'll leave it to you to figure it out. Think of it as something that you need to try out. Don't worry if you don't figure it out. In one of the videos that's coming up, that is 2 videos from now, I'll show you how you can specify a city within your user expression. That is when we book rooms. Now, earlier in this video, I spoke about manually annotating your user expression when Dialogflow doesn't automatically identify an entity. Let's see an example of how we can do that. So I'm going to write an expression where Dialogflow doesn't identify the car type that I want to book. Let's say I say reserve a sports car. A sports car is not in the defined entity values that we set up earlier. It's a car type that we haven't seen before. So we have to explicitly annotate it so that Dialogflow knows that it refers to the entity car type or cars as we had defined it. In order to do this, select the sport word, select the at cars entity that we defined earlier, and the annotation will be set up for you. So you can manually annotate your user expressions as well. The list of entities will show up when you right click on your word selection. Thanks to your explicit manual annotation, Dialogflow will know that sports is also a type of car. What annotations are should be very clear to you now. They basically link the values that you specify in the user expressions with entities that are system defined or developer defined. So, annotations are used to make this connection to associate the values that the user provides in his text responses with the slots that need to be filled to get all the required information to fulfill the user's intent. Annotations are added automatically by Dialogflow. It's smart enough to figure out what the values are, or if it's not automatic, you can always add them manually.